With us, Lynn Davidson, who is a former special advisor to the Conservative government, Shone Craven, who's a columnist for The National, and STV's political editor, Colin Mackay. Well, thank you all for joining us. And Lynn, Michel Barnier back for talks in London. I'm getting flashbacks. Where are we with all of this?
I know. Brexit is back. Haven't you missed it? With an added US plot twist. Yes, Michel Barnier got back on the Eurostar and travelled over on Sunday evening, I understand it, to continue these talks with David Frost, the Prime Minister's principal Brexit negotiator. And of course, we still are in pretty much the same place we were before, where they're still talking about having worthwhile discussions. But the clock is ticking and time is running out. There was talk about there being something like 10 to 15 days left. But as I said, the clock is ticking, and we're not hearing much on the main two pieces of stalemate, which were state aid, of which there's been a little bit of movement, and fishing, the totemic issue, of course.
And Colin, the House of Lords tonight voting as we speak, in fact, on the internal market, and they've been giving the government a hard time on this.
They have, because they are concerned that this breaks, the withdrawal agreement breaks international law. The UK government, none less than the Northern Irish Secretary Brandon Lewis, has accepted that it does break the law, he said, in a very specific and limited way. So basically, I think after this, the government has two choices. The Prime Minister has two choices. He can either accept the Lords' amendment, but he won't be able to get that past the Brexiteers in his own party, or he can reinsert the clauses that the Lords are going to take out tonight, but he won't get that past the EU, or as we've just heard from Tim Marshall, President-elect Biden. I think I would go along with what Lord Lamont, Norman Lamont, the former Chancellor, said tonight, which is that they're in a terrible mess, aren't they?
And Shona, Lynn was talking about the clock ticking. Do you think we realistically could end up with a no deal?
I still think anything's possible, but hopefully Biden's election makes a deal a little bit more likely. I do think that all along the intention was not to have to use the clauses, and not indeed to need the internal market bill. And I think it's easy to forget that this is only for if we don't get a deal with the EU. So the pressure is really on now, but I gather there's been some kind of movement on fishing, hopefully. And so this may all prove to be moot, which would actually be just ridiculous, that we've damaged our reputation so badly by saying we would break international law, when actually it might not come to it and might not be part of that process at all in the end.
And Lynn, you've been on the inside. What do you think the government might do?
I think we always, I always knew that the Prime Minister and the government would be doubling down on this, regardless of what happens in the Lords tonight. We're still awaiting the result of the vote there, which I think we thought would be a little bit earlier, but this seems to be taking a little bit more time. I think all that we heard from the Lords is pretty expected. Ken Clarke this evening, damning indictment, scathing on the government, talking about it being a Trump-like gesture and immoral for the government to do this. But he's obviously a Europhile. You've obviously got Brexiteers like Lord Howard, who have also been scathing of the government's position. But I think this is all expected. There is still time for, as Shona said, for them to secure a free trade agreement, which would mean that these clauses would not become law in themselves. But the government will use its significant majority to overturn the Lords' decision, which we expect tonight anyway.
And Shona, moving on to John Major, the former Prime Minister, suggesting that Boris Johnson should consider two referenda on Scottish independence, one on the principle and then one on the deal. Do you think nationalists will bite at that?
No, I don't. And it's interesting to see this being mentioned, because this has been spoken about before, generally in the context of the SNP backing a people's vote. And a lot of people did say at the time, be careful there. If you are seen to be backing a people's vote, does that mean that in future there would be a people's vote on an independence deal? And so it's quite canny of John Major to kind of go into that path that's been created. But of course he did, in the same breath, use the term separatists to describe those who are pro-independence and made it very, very clear where his own loyalties lie. So I think, again, we're seeing this sort of, let's just change the rules, let's just try and rig things. But it's interesting to hear John Major say that the UK government position on just saying no isn't sustainable, because that's certainly Nicola Sturgeon's line. But a lot of people aren't really sure that that's true, and say, well, you can say it's not sustainable. It might be an outrage, but it could continue to be an outrage as long as the Tories remain in power at Westminster.
And Colin, John Major saying that this argument seems to be based on the experience from Brexit.
I mean, he's someone who actually backed the confirmatory vote on Brexit as well. It's something I've heard from him before. But I mean, I can't see either side backing this. I can't see the SNP or the Greens backing this, because the SNP are looking for the kind of precedent that they set in 2011 when they got the 2014 referendum, if they can get a majority at next year's election. And I can't see Boris Johnson paying much heed to what John Major said. He certainly didn't over Brexit. I don't think he's going to over this either, because his line is absolute. There will not be another referendum as long as he is Prime Minister. And he's going to have to stick to that, because if he gives an inch, then you can guarantee that the pro-independent supporters will take a mile.
And Lynn, is that how you see it? Is that how the Conservatives will take these proposals?
It will be interesting to see. Obviously, that was the line that Theresa May took when she was Prime Minister. It was an adamant no, to be fair, because obviously when the referendum took place, it was considered to be a once in a lifetime event, and then the goalposts were trying to be altered from that. So Theresa May took that position, an adamant no, and Boris Johnson's continued that policy since he's been in power. I'm not really sure how the thought of two referenda would go down with the Scottish public, quite frankly. I'm not sure quite at the moment with COVID and everything else they would feel about that. I think Nicola Sturgeon is continually trying to walk this tightrope, because if she even was allowed a second independence referendum, if that was lost, well, that would be the goal gone forever.
And Lynn, is it sustainable for the Prime Minister, given what the polls are predicting for the Scottish Parliament elections next year, is it sustainable for Boris Johnson to keep saying no?
Well, that's an interesting point, John, and I'm sure it's something that they're thinking about and monitoring closely. I think ahead of these May elections, it's probably something for the Scottish public to think about, because even though we have seen this increase in support for independence, and we saw Professor John Curtis has commented on that recently in the mid-50s now. Someone, tell me which it is, 54 or 57? Someone tell me what it's at now.
It varies. 58 was one of the ones I heard, but I'm sure the STV one said 58, so we'll go with that one.
Yeah. So even though it's higher at the moment, that is with the added caveat that the Westminster government saying no to it, because you're kind of safe if you're being polled on it and you know it's not ever going to happen. You've obviously got that safe space, if you like, to illustrate your view, perhaps, of the Westminster government. Be interested to hear what others think. And
briefly, on that point, Shona, what can the Scottish government do?
Well, it's interesting that John Major has his own views about what's legal and what's not legal. I don't know what he's basing that on. Certainly, it's not something that is the settled, accepted view that we're not allowed to have a referendum. Certainly not an advisory referendum. But that's something that's still to be tested. I don't think people are deciding that they're going to say they're going to vote for independence just because they want to stick it to Westminster. But I think it is true that Boris Johnson will continue to say no, but we have to ask how long he will be Prime Minister for, and therefore, are we talking about the next 6 months, which realistically we probably are. So the question is, what happens after Boris Johnson? In the same way that, Trump's old news, Boris Johnson will be old news very soon, and we will not have a leader referring to the Scottish Nationalist Party at PMQs and all this kind of childish behaviour. We'll have to get some grown-up politics happening when there's a new leader in charge. Talking
of grown-up politics, we've got the canary trap, the Telegraph, and that's high-tech picture there telling you it's about canaries. Today's Telegraph saying that Downing Street considering a canary trap to expose leakers, basically sending out different versions of a document to see who's leaking. Lynn, is this going to be effective?
I actually looked up an article because I couldn't remember. I think in 2016, the then Cabinet Secretary, Sir Jeremy Haywood, who's sadly no longer with us, he launched a leak inquiry into the leaking of a letter warning about leaks in government. I'm not sure if they ever found out the source of the leak at that time, but leaks happen in government. This particular government has made it pretty clear that it does not tolerate leaks. It has launched a full-scale inquiry into this most recent one, and this most recent leak is about details of meeting between the Prime Minister, Health Secretary, Chancellor, and CDL Michael Gove about lockdown plans. They consider it, a leak that's damaged trust at a time of national crisis during the pandemic. I think they've got a fair point there. There should not be leaks of this nature. The public deserve to know the full picture, not source quotes from someone on these matters. They're taking it very seriously. I think if they find the person, they should be able to. I'm not sure how long they will last.
And Colin, leaks, as Lynn said, they're part of politics, aren't they?
They seem to be particularly part of politics for the current UK government, which seems to be by and large run by leaks. And I'm not convinced they will find out the culprit here. I think what you're seeing at the moment is you've had Marcus Rashford, a Premiership footballer, driving their social policy. Now you've got Colleen Rooney, a footballer's wife, driving their leak inquiry, because this is what she did to Rebecca Vardy. My favourite thing about this entire story is that it's a canary trap, and the story about the canary trap was broken on Twitter. It was a tweet.
Just very briefly, of course, this all came from, just very briefly in this show, it came from a meeting anyway, not a briefing.
Yeah, a meeting with quite few people at it. But I think the question we have to ask, are these leaks actually leaks, or were they deliberate floating of policies? I'm a bit cynical about which were leaks and which were deliberately shared.
OK, well, thank you all for joining us on the Monday Night.